Hey, thanks for joining me. Thanks for choosing to have me in your ear today. I have just had the pleasure of interviewing an American Navy SEAL commander, John Macaskill. He is an absolute great guy. It was a pleasure to have him on. We talk about the whole Navy SEALs training, the buds, the selection process, but more poignant than that, we talk about PTSD, we talk about anxiety, stress and depression, the experiences that John had himself with feelings of survivor's guilt, and how mindfulness and meditation actually helped him through those times. John is now actually become a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and he is helping veterans with their struggles too. Hope you enjoy this one. Hey, John Macaskill, thank you for joining me today.
Richard, it's great to be here with you. Thank you. Thank you from across the ocean here in the States.
You're the first American that I've had on this podcast, so thank you very much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well, I'm honored, one, to be on the podcast, and two, to be your first American on the show. So hopefully I live up to America's standards, although I'm not sure what those are. So I'm honored either way.
I'm sure you will. I mean, you're not just an American, you're a Navy SEAL. So I should have called you Commander John Macaskill, actually, as I introduced you there. So pardon me for that.
No, that's fine. I'm soon to be retiring, as a matter of fact, at the end of this month. So I will soon no longer be a commander in the SEAL teams. Soon going to be Mr. Macaskill, just like every other person.
I mean, it's what you've been in the Navy or the SEALs for 26 years, is it? Am I right?
24 years, close. So yeah, I enlisted in 1996 and then went through an officer program. Specifically, I went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and then went from Annapolis out to Coronado, California for SEAL training. So officially got pinned as a Navy SEAL in February of 2003. So been a SEAL since then. So a little over 17 years as a SEAL. The rest of the time, either as an enlisted man, parachute rigger specifically in the Navy, or as a midshipman at the Naval Academy.
Awesome. So where did it all start? Did you have you got family ties to like a military background, or was it just something that you decided you wanted to do? I mean, I always see the Navy SEALs and like we've, the SAS over here, or even just the military in general. And it's something that I was always like, no, you've got to be superhuman to kind of even contemplate doing this.
I think there's a little bit of that. I think there's a little bit of craziness too. But one, I'll tell you, I've worked with both the SAS and SBS, and I absolutely love my brothers in both of them, and phenomenal operators, ridiculously hard people. So you guys, I think, may think something of the SEALs. We think very highly of the SAS and SBS. But I'll tell you, and I think you'll actually appreciate this, Richard. I was actually born in South Africa. My parents back on both sides, we go back several generations in South Africa. And in 1984, when my parents were about my age, they uprooted us from South Africa and moved us to Louisiana. I have three older sisters and a younger brother. So my parents are heroes to me, because I can't imagine doing that with 5 children. I've got 2 young children, and moving them from one state to the other is hard enough. But moving them across the ocean to a completely different culture, I'm sure that was terrifying. And when they got to the States from South Africa, the culture shock. I mean, they moved us from South Africa because they didn't agree with apartheid or where the government was going, because at the time, South Africa was still under minority rule, with the whites running the country, and the blacks there being very much oppressed, very much so. Moved to the States, and that was the first time I was actually integrated in school. I was in first grade, but still I was integrated in school with my fellow Black students, and then grew up, integrated through school. And another reason my parents moved us was conscription was still a thing in South Africa at the time, and they didn't want myself and my younger brother to be drafted into the military. They wanted us to have a choice. So
Okay.
so the irony is we moved to the States, and then I actually voluntarily enlisted in the military. So yeah, enlisted in the Navy in 1996. I knew that I always wanted to serve. Coming over to the States, I fell very much in love with the country. I fell very much in love with what the flag stood for. And and I know there's a lot of debate about that right now with Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd killing over here in the States. I mean, that has become a global topic of conversation. But I will tell you what I believe the flag stands for is freedom and justice for all, and I believe that we're making strides towards that. And that's as political as I'll get, I promise, Richard. But I believe very much in the flag and what it stood for. So I wanted to serve, and I wanted to serve in an elite team because in high school I was part of a track and cross country team, and we were a very tight knit group, small tight knit group. We were very good, and I wanted to carry that forward and do something as part of a small tight knit group that was very good. And then growing up in Louisiana, every year my family would go and visit the beach in the Gulf of Mexico there, and I knew that I wanted to be in the Navy. So what the Navy had that was elite was the SEALs. So I decided upon the SEALs somewhere in high school, and then pursued that once I enlisted in 1996, and then went through the Naval Academy. So that's kind of how it started, and then has kind of played out since then.
Oh no, that's a great story. So I didn't know that about you. So very noble that you came into the country and you wanted to serve and you believe in the country. And as you say, you picked up on something very poignant right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. We're seeing it over here ourselves. It's a huge thing, but I feel like it's needed to happen. And it's great. And like you said, I don't like to go too political either, and we discussed this at the beginning of the podcast, or actually before we started recording. So, but yeah, I think it's something we all should stand up for. It's a huge thing, and
absolutely.
I can't agree with you anymore. So it's just the same as you coming into that country. My father came over to England from Hungary, and nobody is like born anywhere anymore, or very rare. We all came from somewhere. You go back generations, and we all came from somewhere before we got to the countries that we now see. So we're all equal, and that's your color of your skin, your religion, all that kind of stuff. I read something the other day what was great, and it was like talking about we're all cleansing our hands and things like that now because of COVID and what's happened. We're all washing our hands. We need to wash our souls of all racism and all this kind of thing that we're seeing. And I really, really do think that this is a great thing that's happened. It's had to happen, and it's been fairly peaceful over here. I don't know how it's gone over in America. I've not kept too many tabs on it, but things seem to be changing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely been there've been far more peaceful protests than there have been riots. I think there have been riots, and quite honestly, there's a lot of anger that has been underlying for years, decades, probably even centuries when you really look back. As a white man living in the U.S., it's hard for me to say, "Hey, you shouldn't be rioting," when I quite honestly have grown up fairly privileged in that. Yes, I did go to school integrated, but even my Black friends in Louisiana that I ran track and cross country with, I would drive across town to where they lived, quote unquote, on the other side of town, and they didn't have the opportunities that I had. They didn't have, they certainly didn't go down to the Gulf of Mexico every summer and spend a vacation there with their family at the beach, where I had that opportunity. So, when they talk about Black Lives Matter and then they talk about white privilege, there's I know that's not the topic of the show, so I'll try to get off the topic here. But I do. It's hard to be living in what we're living through right now and not have some type of conversation about this. In that, right now I'm in a building and there's a statue outside dedicated to the Confederate dead, so those who died for the Confederacy in the Civil War, and that statue is coming down. And that it's all because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's great to see. And I love the analogy that you mentioned there about, if we washed our hands for COVID-19 to stay safe, and now we need to wash our souls. We absolutely need to wash our souls, but we also need to realize that, underneath our skin, we're all the same. We're all humans, and we all deserve the same rights and justices. So I fully support the Black Lives Matter movement here in the U.S. and all around the world, because it's not just here where Black lives are oppressed. So it's certainly something that needs to happen, and I'm glad to be a part of it, glad to be behind it.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, it's not the topic of the show, but it is definitely worth picking up on, especially with you being from the States. And it was nice to just get a little bit of an insight into your side of it as well. So, I mean, moving on, I was really intrigued to know, you said you wanted to become a SEAL. You knew that
Right.
from a young age. And I've seen the training program just more on TV, but I've heard things. I've listened to the likes of David Goggins, who
yes,
who hasn't. I think we all know Goggins. But did you know what you were getting yourself into when you enlisted for that and you went into that training program? Did you realize how hard that training was going to actually be?
I will say yes, and the only reason I will say yes is that I was blessed to go to the Naval Academy, and the Naval Academy is a 4-year college, and so you have fellow students who are senior to you, and those seniors go out to SEAL training before you ever do. So I was the class of 2001, so I watched the class of 1998, the class of 1999, and the class of 2000 all go out to SEAL training. I heard from them what it was. I mean, back then the Discovery documentaries didn't exist, but I'd read about everything in books. I talked to those who went out. So in a sense, I probably had a much better idea of what that training would entail than a lot of my classmates out at Buds. I think the enlisted men that come out to Buds,
and that's Buds' basic underwater demolition SEAL.
I'm sorry. Yes. Buds is
just for the non-military. I mean, I'm not very clued up on military myself.
No, you got it.
People who are loving it, but yeah, this is what you get when you listen to David Goggins' audio. You learn a little bit.
You got it. And as a matter of fact, since you mentioned David Goggins, his book "You Can't Hurt Me." I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to read that, but I've read it, and then I went back and listened to the audio version, and it is one of the few books. As a matter of fact, I'll say it's probably the one book that I think the audio version was a lot better than the actual book, because they break it up into, it's almost like a podcast format where the author. Have you listened to it?
Yeah, that's how. I only listened. I didn't read the original book.
Yeah,
it's amazing because I like at the end of. So the guy will be reading, and they'll actually stop because he'll be, "Wow, David." So let me just pick up on this, and then they'll expand, and you just get all that extra content that you wouldn't get from a book.
Right. Yeah, it's phenomenal. So I really enjoyed that. But yeah, so sorry. Basic underwater demolition SEAL training. It's a 6-month program that has somewhat become infamous for its either 4th or 5th week, depending on the time of year that they have it. But the 4th or 5th week is Hell Week, and that during that Hell Week, that's when we get a lot of people that quit. They literally ring out. There's a bell that's carried everywhere, and the quitters ring the bell and have to quit. it's an intense training that a lot of the people who show up for aren't quite ready for. Um, but I will say that I was lucky enough to have picked the brains of those who had gone before me, so I somewhat knew. And I say somewhat because I still don't think anything can fully prepare you for what BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, is truly made up of. Everybody has
Yeah.
a chink in their armor, and in some form or fashion, the instructors out there are going to find that chink and then exploit that chink to make you want to quit. So yeah, it's a crucible of sorts, a rite of passage for all SEALs, and when you come out of it, I think you're much better prepared to handle what you're going to be exposed to in the SEAL teams doing what we do.
Definitely. So it's all about not breaking, and they're trying to break
Right.
you, and you
Yeah.
have to stay like, and as much as you have to be strong physically, I take it it's the mental toughness which you really must possess to get you through that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't, I don't know a percentage, but I've heard 90% mental and all that other garbage, but it's definitely a high level of mental tenacity. There are people that come out there that are in just incredible shape. They are in incredible shape, and they don't make it because they're not mentally prepared. Some of the best athletes that I have seen in my life show up to BUDS and they don't make it. Some of my classmates from the Naval Academy that were incredible athletes, they went to BUDS and they didn't make it. So yeah, it is a crucible, and if you're not mentally prepared, they will find a way to exploit your weakness.
It's having go muscles and not show muscles. I think that's the way.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
So you go through buds, and then is it? There's still quite a process after this before you actually become a SEAL.
Right.
I've seen a few different, and I don't know it as well as it I probably should have sort of looked up. But I know there's the SEAL qualification training, and then there's troop and platoon training. You've got jump school. I don't know the exact way
Yeah.
it all works, but
Wow.
yeah,
You've done your homework. I'm pretty impressed. Yeah. So yeah, BUDS, basic underwater demolition. That's just basically your first exposure to naval special warfare. And BUDS is broken into three phases. The first phase is your basically your that's really the crucible. That's where you're going to get a lot of the physical training. They try to weed out the weak, or those, I won't say the weak, but they will weed out those who don't really want to be there. Second phase is dive phase. That's where you learn to do a lot of the diving on the closed circuit rebreather, the Drager, which is a closed circuit diving apparatus. And then from there, you go into third phase, which is land warfare phase, where you learn the very basics about land warfare. So you learn land navigation, you learn some explosives, you learn how to operate your radio, how to work as a team on the battlefield, that kind of stuff. But it's all the basics, and that's why it's called Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, BUDS. And then you go on from there to SEAL qualification training. You actually go from there, you do go to Alaska to do some cold weather training. And then you go from Alaska back to Coronado. You do your SEAL qualification training, and you do your jump training. You used to go out to Fort Benning, which is the Army's jump training, but Naval Special Warfare ended up developing our own. So we do our static line and our free fall jump training. All in-house within Naval Special Warfare. And then at the end of SEAL qualification, that's when you're pinned a SEAL. That's when you're initially said, yeah, you are officially a SEAL. And then that's really when the journey begins. So you don't go from when you're pinned to instantly deploying, because all that stuff is the basics. You get to your team and your first platoon. That's where you start learning the more in-depth stuff, a lot more detail about radios, about diving, about maritime operations, about jump training, about urban warfare, that type of stuff. And then really where the gel is important that it forms is learning the members of your platoon, learning the other people in your platoon, and learning how they work and how to work with them. I mean, you get to be such good friends that on a night patrol, you can recognize who somebody is just by the gait of their walk, that type of thing. You get very close. So, and you learn to trust one another, and they learn to trust you. So that's important. So yeah, you nailed it in that, SEAL qualification training, that's the end of your like official training as far as becoming a SEAL. But then once you are a SEAL, there's a ton of training that comes after that is going to make you the sharpened tool that the military can use to do what we do.
So really, it's really the first part of it. The BUDS training is just to make sure that you are worthy of being a SEAL, that you can handle being a SEAL, and then when you go on past that, it's really about homing in on those skills, sharpening that blade, as you put it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way of summarizing it.
And did you, at any point throughout your time in BUDS, did you ever get close to feeling like you just weren't going to cut it and you needed to? Did you guys call it a VW, voluntary withdrawal?
We call it a DOR, drop on request.
Okay.
So yeah, something similar. But yeah, I would be lying if I said that I didn't have those thoughts. I'm 6'2", and I'll be completely honest in that I am not the most coordinated individual in the world, and the like I was a great runner. I was really good at swimming, which are big pieces of BUDS. But the obstacle course, because it requires coordination and also a great amount of strength, I struggled with several obstacles on there, and I got hugely frustrated with that, to the point where I thought, okay, maybe I'm not meant to be a SEAL. But I went in on the weekends and I worked on the obstacle course so that I would improve, and eventually got those obstacles down, and obviously ended up making it. But that was a piece. It was more out of frustration than anything else that made me think about quitting then. And then during Hell Week, there was one evening. I think it was, so we started on Sunday night. And by Wednesday night, one of the instructors, we were being what's called surf tortured. So you're put in the surf in the cold water. It's freezing, and it was a winter Hell Week. So it was February in 2002. I think that's right. Yeah, February 2002, and terribly cold water Wednesday night. And he said something to the effect of, "Well, guys, it's only Tuesday night, and Hell Week doesn't end until Saturday night," which wasn't true. It was actually Wednesday night, and Hell Week ends on Friday. But in my mind, he got to me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we've hardly gone anywhere." And by Wednesday night, I'll back up a little bit. When I touched on Hell Week before, I didn't mention that you don't get any sleep. Well, you get 3 hours of sleep the whole week, not 3 hours of sleep every night, but 3 hours of sleep through the whole week. And so you start kind of seeing things and hearing things differently. And when an instructor tells you that it's Tuesday night, when it's in fact Wednesday, you start believing it. And so I was like, oh, wow, I'm hardly even into this week. So there was a point there where I almost broke, but then I was like, wait a minute, we did this activity this night. We did this activity this night. And, then I was like, okay, he's lying. It's actually Wednesday night. So I came back to my senses. But there was a part of me that considered it for sure.
Yeah, it's got to be tough when you're so disorientated, and they're just constantly trying to break in, and they're feeding you this false information, which is making you think you're even further back than what you actually are.
Right.
I can imagine it. Yeah, it's something that I've seen. I've seen some stuff on TV over here. We've got a show, SAS, Who Dares Wins, and it's the same thing. They put, and they've started doing it with celebrities now as well, but it's not as intense.
Oh, yeah, fun.
Yeah, but they're really like putting them through the paces, and even boxers. I'm talking professional, high-level boxers, recently retired ones as well. They're struggling with it, and when it gets to the part where they do like I can't think off the top of my head what it's called, but it's an interrogation. It's they capture them, and then they take them to interrogation. They put them in certain stress positions. That's where you see even the sort of front runners, the strongest of the bunch. That's where you see them really start to crack. So yeah,
Right.
it's a very interesting thing. But not to stick on that too much, because I know we've got quite a bit to get through, and we're on limited time. Limited time. So I mean, going forward, you become a SEAL. I know that you served in Iraq, Afghanistan, off the coast of Somalia, and Panama. Um, I understand that we can't go into too much about that. It's something that you guys,
Right.
I don't know what you'd call it, but it's something that you just kind of don't do. I know there's people out there that probably have, but the general thing is that you guys don't do that. So I'm not going to pick up too much on that. But where I want to
Thanks.
go with this, not a problem at all, is we see in the military now a lot of people coming out of the military and they're suffering with PTSD, and it's a real like paralyzing thing, and it's a catalyst for depression, anxiety, coming out of that environment, seeing the things they've seen, and without prying too much. I know that you had your own problems.
Right.
Was that due to certain things that you'd seen, the experiences you had whilst you was on some of these tours?
It was, yeah, directly, and I won't go into too much detail, but there a few experiences that affected me the most, and specifically that gave me post-traumatic stress, but they also gave me a huge amount of survivor's guilt in that my friends died and I lived, and they had families that I came back to, and they obviously were not coming back to their. Oh, sorry, I came back to my family, and they were obviously not coming back to their family. So that survivor's guilt I carried with me for years, and battled with it, battled with the anxiety that came with it, battled with the stress and the depression that came with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that led me through some deep dark times, but it also ultimately brought me to where I am today. And yeah, and we could definitely get into that shortly, but it was a stepping stone towards where I am today.
Yeah, that's something I've never actually heard of, survivor's guilt. And I never really
Yeah,
thought about
it's
that.
a big one.
Because you
Yeah,
would think that, you would, them things are going to affect you. You're going to lose close friends, brothers, as you would probably call them. And
absolutely.
you think about that, losing them, and that's what's tough. That's what could cause you to feel anxious, depressed, stressed. But actually, carrying survivor's guilt is a different one. I've never actually heard that. So you're
Yeah,
actually almost feeling like you shouldn't be there if they're not there. Is I suppose that's just a very honourable thing,
exactly.
because
Yeah, it's that, and hoping that the life that you lead from this point forward is worth, their I don't know how to phrase this, but almost as though it's worth their dying and you're living. Not that I'm trading my life for theirs or their life for mine, but I definitely want to earn the life that I'm living now, knowing that they didn't get a chance to.
yeah, I can see that you want to live your life after that to the fullest, to honour them, I suppose, as well, and I can see why that
Exactly.
would make you appreciate life so much more.
Right.
Picking up on what you said about what you're doing now, and I've heard a few stories. I've actually watched some videos with you, and you talk about a stigma that's attached to. I don't know if you want to explain what happened. So you was experiencing these.
Sure.
I'll let you go
Yeah,
into
I'll
it, tell
jump
the
up.
story. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. So, yeah, that survivor's guilt, like I mentioned before, led me through several struggles, and the Navy had me get some counseling. I did some talk counseling for a while. Eventually, got put on different types of medication, some anti-anxiety, antidepressant pills, and I was on various forms of that. And they helped to a point. The side effects I didn't enjoy, and eventually the help that they were giving me wasn't what I wanted. So I came off of them, kind of cold turkey, and went to a counselor and asked him what I could do to help myself heal that did not entail the pills.
Mm-hmm.
and he recommended mindfulness and meditation. And to be quite honest, there's a stigma that surrounds that mindfulness and meditation. There's the stigma and stereotype that surrounds that, is that, you know, you have to be a hippie, you have to be a woman, you have to be a monk to practice that.
Yeah, sure.
Which is not at all true. And again, and I've said this a few times on other shows, you know, that stereotype. I have nothing against any of those. I have no problem with hippies, no problem with women. I have no problem with monks, but I am not one. I'm a man, 6'2". I kind of consider myself battle hardened, knuckle dragon guy, and mindfulness and meditation seem type of flowery or kind of woo woo to me. But he explained the physiology behind it, that showed me some data, which I'm a big data guy. And once he showed me those things, then I took it upon myself to start practicing very simply, just using some apps on my phone, just starting very small, starting like 2 minutes here, 3 minutes, working my way up to 15 minutes. And eventually I started to see a difference in how I was responding to things, how I was handling things, how I was focused at work, how I was communicating with others, and then quite honestly, how I was experiencing life, you know, how I felt about life.
Yeah.
And that caused me to become an avid practitioner of mindfulness and meditation, because I fully believe in it now. So here I am.
Yeah, and going back to that stigma, you know, it's one of them things, isn't it? Like you said, you're battle hardened. You're supposed to be, or at least you see yourself that I'm a SEAL. You know, why am I going to meditate?
Exactly.
Like, I'm tough. The things that you went through, the things that you've seen, the training that you did that we spoke about, to go and meditate. It's like you think of that with yoga. One of the things I used to do a lot, I used to do a lot of yoga, and at first I was a bit like, I did P90X, and it was a guy doing it, so I was like, all right, it's cool. He's doing it. He's a guy. He's got muscles. And then I did spin, and now I take it as spin in America as well. Spin class on the bikes. Anybody who tells you spin is for women needs to get into a spin class, because that's hard. You know?
Yes, my father was a big time spin. Right, he was a big time cyclist, but I went and did a spin class with him at one point, and it's extremely hard.
Yeah, it's so tough, and as I say, that's again, it's like you're like, oh man, I can do this. Like you might be benching 140 kgs, but you know, you sit that big guy on a bike for 5 minutes and you'll be struggling.
Right,
and it's the same thing. It's a stigma. So, what advice could you give? I suppose first of all, what are the signs that you would say to ex-servicemen and women? How could they sort of see this early on that they're suffering with PTSD? Is that something you think you could?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's underlying, and it is hard to identify. PTS can manifest itself in different ways for different people. For myself, I was not enjoying life. One, two, I wasn't sleeping, at least not normal hours. So, you know, I'd wake up after a couple of hours of sleep and then stay up the rest of the night. Or I would respond to a crowd a certain way. Being around a crowd was very uncomfortable if I was able to do it at all. Going out to a restaurant, back when that was a thing prior to COVID-19, going out to have dinner somewhere, I would always feel like I needed to have my face towards the door and identify the exits, just in case something happened.
Okay, yeah.
I would have recurrent nightmares about specific events that happened on the battlefield, or a smell or a sound would invoke those same memories. So if you're experiencing some of that, that may be a time that you want to go and seek some help. And that's, another stigma. We talk about the stigma that surrounds mindfulness and meditation. There's also a stigma that just surrounds seeking mental health support in general.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, we as the military are guilty of kind of propagating that stigma, in that we're like, oh, well, what do you need help for? Why do you need to go see a shrink? Right?
Yeah.
Calling the psychiatrist a shrink and saying,
Yeah.
why do you need to go see them? What's going on in your life? Well, maybe nothing's going on, but maybe you just want to go and maintain your mental health. It's just like going to the gym, in that you go to the gym to maintain physical fitness. You don't go to the gym solely when you've hurt yourself. You don't go to the gym as therapy, as physical therapy. You go to the gym as maintaining your physical health, physical fitness.
Yeah.
Well, going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist regularly just to check in and say, hey, look, this is what I've got going on. That's maintaining your maintaining your mental health. So that's another stigma that we need to break down, in that people can go and seek mental health support if they're struggling or if they're not. Either way, there should be no stigma, and it should be celebrated as, good job. You're doing something good for yourself. You're doing something good for those you work with. You're doing something good for your family in seeking out that support.
Yeah, and it's a great point. It is a great point, because people think, no, I've got to be crazy. I've got to be something really wrong with me. But no, as you say there, it's just taking care of your mental health. Go and see somebody, check in, and like you say, you don't have to even be feeling these emotions. Sometimes something can be uncovered that you didn't really see at first. And I mean, I suppose the point I was trying to get to is that if something's identified earlier on, I suppose that is going to be much more helpful than letting it take control of you, because then it's harder to take control of it, if you like.
Right, exactly.
So you picked up on that this has led you into what you're doing now. Is this Veterans Path?
Yes. So Veterans Path, it's a nonprofit here in the States where we're teaching veterans mindfulness and meditation to help them deal with that stress, anxiety, and depression that we've talked about earlier in the show. But it's also something that we're hoping to branch out and bring to active service members and transitioning service members, so that they have these tools earlier on in their careers, so that when they get exposed to the stress and anxiety, because it's going to happen one way or another, but when they are exposed, then they have these tools of mindfulness and meditation to help them to deal with it.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I like the name as well. Veterans Path is a great name. I must pick up on that, because PATH is an acronym, and the military love acronyms.
Yes. Indeed. Yeah, so PATH is an acronym. You really have done your homework, Richard. I'm impressed. PATH is an acronym. It's peace, acceptance, transformation, and honor. And that's really what we hope to help veterans find, is that sense of peace, acceptance, transformation, and honor.
Yeah, and that's great. And it's a non-profitable organization, and this is something that I take it was close to your heart for going through this yourself, and then you've just wanted to be able to help others that are in the same situations.
Right.
The meditation side. Well, actually, let's talk about mindfulness, because I've always questioned what do you mean? What is mindfulness? How do we practice mindfulness? And I have talked about this, and I've picked up on it with a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist, but only briefly. And it'd be nice to get your take on that as well. What would you class as mindfulness?
Sure. So, yeah, there's definitely a misconception in that people believe mindfulness and meditation are synonymous. And there's definitely overlap between the two, but they're not one and the same. So mindfulness is nothing more than being present in the present moment, paying attention to the present moment, the experiences you're experiencing, the sensations that you're feeling, the emotions that you're feeling in the here and the now, and not worrying about the past, not thinking too much about the future. That's all that mindfulness is. Well, let me add one level to that, and that's experiencing the present moment without judgment. So if you're experiencing a tough time, allow that tough time to be. You don't have to judge yourself for how you're feeling. Just experience it, and then know that moment will pass. If you're experiencing a great time, that's great.
Okay.
And you can experience that great time. So that's all mindfulness is. And you can be mindful while you're having a conversation, much like we are right now, in that, as you ask me a question, I'm not trying to formulate an answer. I'm listening to what it is you're saying, and then speaking from the heart and from the mind after you have asked your question, not halfway through. You can be mindful when you eat. As you eat a meal, pay attention to the smell of the meal, pay attention to the texture of the food, pay attention to the actual taste, and in doing so, that is being mindful, and that can actually help you experience life. And as you experience life, you can enjoy life, because it's not just passing you by. As you wolf down a hamburger and don't even realize what it tastes like, or you can be mindful in your drive to work. A lot of the time, you may drive to and from work and never have even noticed that you did it. You may not. It may just pass in a blur.
Just like
but if you
being
pay
on
attention,
autopilot.
exactly. So being mindful is the exact opposite. I mean, really, if you think of the term mindless, and then the antithesis of that is being mindful. Being mindless is not paying attention to anything that's happening. Being mindful is paying attention to everything that's happening. So on your drive to work, you pay attention to the other drivers. You know that they are other human beings, and you can have empathy and compassion for what it is they're experiencing. So maybe it will help you with road rage, because you see somebody that's in a hurry, and the first instinct is to kind of swear at them and say, you so and so, get out of my way, or you so and so, you cut me off, when that person may have an emergency. They may have a small child in the car that has just broken an arm, and they need to get to the hospital. And it allows you to just stop for a second and reflect upon why that person may be doing what it is they're doing. So you can be mindful in the drive to and from work. You can be mindful in that you pay attention to, the walk from your car to your office. And maybe there's a flower that you see or you smell. So it quite honestly is the old proverbial saying, stop and smell the roses. That's all mindfulness is.
Yeah, definitely.
And then meditation is where you actually stop and you set aside some more formal time, or you formally set aside some time to be mindful. So you may set aside some time, 15 minutes in the morning, to stop and actually sit down and meditate. However you sit, maybe you stand, maybe you lay down, but you meditate on, and specifically mindfulness meditation is you focus on the here and now during your meditation. Perhaps you're practicing transcendental meditation, which you would focus on a mantra of some sort, but you're focusing on something and not letting your mind control you. You are trying to control your mind, so that your mind may, as you sit down to meditate, your mind may wander off to thinking about something that you messed up yesterday, or something that you have to get done for tomorrow. And when you do that, when your mind wanders off like that, you just notice it and come back to that anchor, whether that anchor is your mantra that you have, or whether that anchor is a sensation in your body, focusing on your breath, focusing on a smell, focusing on the sights or sounds. That's all mindfulness meditation is. But it's being very intentional about setting aside that time to do it. And there's physiological benefits that come with all those great mental benefits that we talked about. You're experiencing life, you're experiencing the sensations of the smells of the meal, you're experiencing the taste, and that's all great. So you're actually getting to experience life, but there's physiological benefits that come with that, in that your mind gets rewired to react a different way. Rather than reacting, you learn to respond with the prefrontal cortex of your mind, which is the part of your mind that's responsible for cognitive thought. Whereas most of the time, whenever we're stressed out, we respond with our amygdala, which is the part of our brain which is responsible for fight, flight, or fright.
Right.
Or sorry, fight or freeze. So that part of our brain is the part that's kind of the reptilian part of our brain. Yeah. And if we're able to respond with that prefrontal cortex, we're going to respond in a much more rational way, eventually communicate better with those that are around us, listen better, and just full circle come back to experiencing life in a much better way.
Yeah, no, it's a real good point. And there is actually a book called The Chimp Paradox. I don't know if you've read that.
No, I haven't.
It's a good one, and that actually talks about the brain. It is about, they call it the chimp brain, and it's when you let's go back to what you were talking about when you're driving a car and you just flip out at somebody, you get road rage because it's just that natural instinct. It's that chimp
Right.
brain in you just to retaliate rather than to actually sit back, think for a second before you do, and you'll find that your response is different because you can let the thought process happen, and that sort of compute part of your brain will take over the chimp, if you like. It's a good book
Right.
to look up. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna look that
and it,
up for
yeah,
sure.
definitely. And it was really interesting to listen to you about the meditation and stuff as well, because this is something that I'm trying to sort of take into my own life, because I'm very much, it's go go go, and it's hard to sort of step back. And I have noticed that throughout this COVID situation, I actually have had a little bit more time to step back, and because I've been working from home instead of traveling to the office and things like that, I would be out on the road a lot more. I've actually quite enjoyed this time. And one of the things that you said about smelling the roses, I went out for a run one morning, and I don't know if it was even more powerful because there's been less pollution on the streets, less cars about and things. But when I go for a jog, I like to sort of go to somewhere else. So I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. I'm not going, this is hurting, and I'm only a mile in. I like to try and take my mind somewhere else. And I could
Right.
smell the flowers, and I could smell like the bushes that I was running past and the fields I was going through, and it just helped me get through the run the whole time. And it was just so nice, and it was something that I don't really experience very often because I'm not switched on that way. I'm not being mindful of all
Right.
that. I've usually got a lot of other stuff going around in my head. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I know what I did want to pick up on it is that Veterans Path, you actually do a podcast as well.
We do, yeah. So coming full circle back to the breaking the stigma of seeking mental health support, we have that podcast where I interview veterans who have struggled with PTS, or they've had some type of mental challenge, and they've overcome that challenge by seeking mental health support, and now they're thriving. Or I interview corporate leaders, athletes, other people outside of the military that either practice mindfulness and meditation or have had some type of struggle that they've sought mental health support, and again are now thriving, because I want people to understand that mental health is something that we can work on, something that we don't need to be ashamed of seeking support for. And ultimately, by seeking that support, we can thrive. We can become better. We can become better for ourselves. We can become better for our families, our friends. We can become better for our societies. So why not? Why would you not seek mental health support? Because it's going to make your life happier and healthier all around. So the podcast just is called Veterans Path, and we are on YouTube and on most major podcast platforms. But yeah, that's a part of our mission, is to break that stigma.
Yeah, that's great. And I just wanted to put that in there because before I forget, if I go past it or if whilst it was in my head, I thought
Thank you.
if people are listening and they want to know more, it's a good idea to go over to you and hearing other people's experiences. Sometimes that'll resonate with people that are going through these things, and it's a good way of helping yourself and knowing and understanding that you're not in this alone. You're not going through these kinds of things on your own. This is,
Right.
there's a lot of people. I always talk about, and this isn't related to the military, but I always talk a lot about Tyson Fury. We talk about stigmas. Talking
Yeah.
about a big. I mean, what do you say? You were 6'2". Tyson Fury's like
6'2".
6'9". So you can imagine how big this
Yeah.
guy is. And he is a gypsy. He comes from a gypsy background. Who they are men of men, and to actually for him to come out and talk about his depression and the battles that he went through, I think was such a great thing, because somebody on his platform talking to people that are they're going through these things thinking they're alone, and you see a lot of the time we see celebrity, we see stardom, and we don't see any issues, even though a lot of people are going through that. But for him to come out
Right.
and be so honest about it and represent like a man, the sort of man that he is, just goes to show that there is no stigma. It doesn't matter who you are. we can all suffer from these types of things. So, yeah,
Right.
it was one of that. That's one story that really kind of stood out for me, and it's one that where I think it was just amazing that anybody, because he's a heavyweight champion boxer, and if he can come out and
Right.
talk about it and admit that he was going through these issues and admit that he needed help and he came through it, then anybody can admit to that. Anybody can go and get that help.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm glad people like him are coming out. We've got some football athletes here in the States, American football, coming out because the head injuries that they receive playing football. Yeah, exactly, and that is helping to further break down that stigma, but it's still there, and I hope that in the coming months, years, whatever, however long it takes, we can change it to where mental health is something that is as every day as getting to the gym. Getting to the gym, regularly is just like getting to your mental health expert, whether that's a counselor of some sort, whether it's a meditation teacher of some sort. There's definitely great value added in seeking out that mental health support.
That's awesome. And circling back, I don't want to go too far back, but I was just going to pick up on that you started a family. So that's something that was a good reason to sort of transition into civilian life, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a little 3-year-old little girl and a 1-year-old little boy. So we do have a small family.
So I was going to say that. So your wife was actually in the military as well.
She was, yeah. She is an orthopedic physician assistant and served as an orthopedic PA in the Navy. And actually, we met at SEAL Team 10. We deployed together to Afghanistan, and then got married soon after that. So, yeah, sure enough, she's a veteran. She served for 10 years in the Navy, and then also served in the Coast Guard prior to that. And then her family, she's got brothers in the Army and the Air Force, and now has a sister in the Coast Guard. So her family is big time military. So absolutely, lots of patriotic blood in our family.
So you know what question I'm going to ask next?
Please, yeah, go ahead, shoot.
So if your children said, "Daddy,
yeah,
I want to be,"
I knew it. Yeah. So that, they're still very young. So I've got in my eyes, I've got my opinion about them serving because they're so young. But as I
and how old are your children, by the way?
A 3-year-old little girl and a 1-year-old little boy.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So they're still very they're babies. Tons of fun, tons of work, but tons of fun. Yeah. And I know there's plenty more work to come, but. I think down the road, 15 years for my daughter, 17 years for my son. If they came to me as 18-year-olds and said, "Hey, I want to join the military," I would support it. Mm-hmm. I would support just about anything that they wanted to do. Just about. If it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'd be very proud of their decision, but I would want them to explain what made them make that decision. I don't want them to make any rash decisions. So, if they want to go out and see the world, if they can explain how they're going to do it and why they want to do it, then more power to them. I'll support that too. But right now, as 3-year and 1-year-olds, let me get to kindergarten and go to school first.
I knew you had I knew you had 2 children, what you said earlier, but I didn't realize so young. So. Because I've got a 15-year-old daughter now. I've got a 9-year-old son. So my 15-year-old is at that point of making certain decisions and thinking about the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got a way to go yet, John. So you don't need to worry too much. Right. So I'm aware that you need to shoot soon because you're a busy man. Been up since 3 o'clock this morning, and you're still going.
For sure.
So. Listen, I want to just put out your socials, John. So I know you've got your own podcast, Veterans Path. on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I know you're on LinkedIn as well, where, any of those social media platforms, if you would
Yes,
like
sir.
to sort of put those out there before you go, I'll take those down and we'll put them in the bio as well.
Yeah, on LinkedIn, I'm just under John Macaskill, JonMacaskill. I think there's actually two of them, but it does say on my profile, which is public, does say Navy SEAL on there. And then on Instagram, I believe I'm John underscore Macaskill, so JON_MACASKILL. So that's primarily where I live in the social media public domain. I do have a Facebook, but I try to keep that private to mostly close family and friends. But Instagram and LinkedIn is where I do most of my public work.
And the podcast is just Veterans Path.
Veterans Path. That's it. That's awesome. Just Veterans Path.
All right. Well, John, I know you're a busy guy, so I'm going to let you go. Just want to say thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Good luck to you with the future. Obviously, now you're transitioning out and you're becoming one of us. I wish you all the best for your business, and much love to you and the family.
Well, thanks very much, Richard. I very much appreciate it, and thank you for the opportunity today to, spread the word about mindfulness and meditation, and more importantly about mental health and helping to break that stigma down. So, thanks for having me on the show, and stay safe and stay healthy out there.
No problem. Thank you. Same to you, John.